Okay, I have officially 101, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Just to take advantage of the time of all of you who showed up on time for this presentation. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Susan Jacobson. I'm the Manager of Planning and Site Design here at the Morton Arboretum. And I've got Carissa assisting me today with this presentation, so that she will kind of keep an eye on the chat box to see if there are any questions. So if you do have a question, please put it in there. So we're going to go over a little bit about the Arboretum history, the past planning documents that we've used here at the Arboretum, the changes that we've undergone in the last 10 years since we did our last master plan update, and then I'll review the format for gathering input from all of you to help us with formulating the next 10 years of development here at the Arboretum. So note, I think everyone was muted upon entering, so hopefully that works for everybody. And Carissa will be monitoring the chat group, and I'm gonna go ahead and close my thumbnail so I can see my screen. So this is the master plan update. We've been working on putting this together for a while. This is part of my yearly goals here to work on this, and it's probably a 6 to 9 month process for us to go through and gather all of this information and move forward. So first of all, what you may wonder is, what is a master site plan? For a lot of you were not here when we did our last master site plan update 10 years ago. But it's a long-term planning document that helps us guide the future for the development of the Arboretum grounds. So it starts with an analysis of the existing conditions. So we take a look at the condition of everything on our grounds right now and what's working and what's not working. So it makes recommendations on land use. So talking about what land we have set aside for our collections, what lands for research, our natural areas, and other visitor amenities. We look at circulation, both pedestrian, vehicular, bicycle, parking, and accessibility to all of those visitors. We look at building capacity, both for our visitors and for staff, and we look at the maintenance of our grounds. So the utilities, our infrastructure, and our capacity here at the Arboretum. And then we also consider things like our view sheds, screening, hydrology, the use of water on our site, and protection of certain view sheds. Now we want to look at a little bit about our history. So I'm establishing this vision back in 1922. The Joy Morton had 175 acres that he dedicated that grew to 735 acres by the time of his death in 1934. And that's Joy Morton and his wife Margaret up in the upper left-hand corner. And then we look at the planning of the Arboretum down in the lower left-hand corner. It's Joy Morton working with Charles Sargent and Charles Hutchinson. So they really were two people that he corresponded with as he was doing the setup for the layout for our Arboretum. So on the view on the right is an aerial view of the old Thornhill mansion when it was Joy Morton's home. And you can see the changes in DuPage County since the time the Arboretum was first established. We went from farmland to being completely surrounded by residential property. But this is the master site plan that was done by O.C. Simons, the landscape architect, back in 1922, for just creating a vision for how people would view the grounds here at the Arboretum. Down to the current day of the Arboretum grounds. I don't know if most of you look at the aerial photographs. That's kind of part of my everyday work here at the Arboretum. But on this aerial photograph, you can see our boundary on the grounds, the line that goes around the edges. Orange shows the pathways, the wood chip pathways for the grounds, and black are the roadways that go through the grounds. Blue are the different water areas, the lakes, and then we also have stormwater retention areas on our grounds. And then this is a prettier view that the visitors get, the maps that show a more illustrative view that show just the basics of the areas that our visitors can travel through. And this is the most recent map that shows also the location of our trolls on the grounds. So you can see how with our exhibitions on site, we've looked from getting out of the central core area, which this is the visitor center right here, getting out to spreading our exhibits around on the grounds. So the first modern day master plan was done in 1997 by Johnson, Johnson and Roy. And this is a large document that laid out 4 different phases of development for the Arboretum. So the priority 1 projects are in the white boxes, and priority 2 are in the green, and so on. Priority 3 in the blue, and priority 4 in the orange. So the pink stars let you know what projects had been completed by 2010. So we had done the new entrance way, we'd done the new visitor center, we made improvements to Meadow Lake, and we had started visitor station construction with both out in the prairie and at Big Rock. And we did some reconfiguring and reconstruction of our roads and parking back at that time. So then in the last 10 years, we've also opened up Arbor Lake to the public. We've done improvements up at Thornhill. We made a whole new maintenance facility at the South Farm, and we did some additions to plant production and research. So this is the circulation plan from 1997 plan. So you can see that the basic layout of our road system was there. You don't quite see the road from Thornhill going out to the prairie that goes this way, but it also locates visitor stations. While we only have 2 that are currently built, there were several on site that were proposed. In fact, this highlights both Big Rock and the Prairie Visitor Station, and actually the Gateway for Tree Science. The last circle that just came up on the screen was a location for one of our original visitor stations. Then in 1999, we did a core area master plan. So that was taking all of the information from the 1997 plan and really doing a concentrated plan for the area right around our visitor center, and we did another one for up at Thornhill. So this was looking at how we really wanted to expand the Arboretum and get more people into it. This shows that we were also still keeping our cloverleaf entrance over here on the left. This is before we had the new bridge entrance. And this was also looking at just adding on to the existing old visitor center instead of building a whole new visitor center. But this core area master plan in 1999 had 4 big ideas that we ended up moving forward with. So it was a new visitor center, a new maze garden, the new children's garden, and the conifer walk. But it had a lot of other ideas that we have never realized. So one thing was keeping the old entrance, one was doing an aquatic garden, the woodland garden, a stream garden, a 4 seasons garden, a color garden, home demonstration garden, and an urban fragrance garden, all over here right around the main visitor center area. So this led to our branching out capital campaign, which was the new main entrance, that new main parking lot, a new visitor center, that maze garden, the children's garden, and Meadow Lake renovation. So with talking to Chris Bachtel, I found out that the reason that we really got the main entrance instead of the old cloverleaf entrance was because at that time in history, the state was doing, had money to do special projects, and we put in for a grant to help us finance making a new main entrance. I can't imagine our 1.3 million visitors that we get now all entering through our cloverleaf and very convoluted old entrance way to the Arboretum. For those of you who have been friends of the Arboretum for a long time, you may remember that. Around that same time, in 2001, we did the first official collections master plan. This was done to really map out and lay out where our current collections were and where they needed to expand to in the future. So you can see also here that the red area is mainly our visitor center area, the main core area, and the light purple up here is considered the Thornhill landscape. And then you can see that the different collections as in the different colors. So in those changes in the Arboretum from 1999 to 2010, we noticed big increases in attendance, just mainly from our first capital campaign and adding the children's garden and a new visitor center and the new parking lot. We noticed a big increase in the activity in our core area. We saw a really big increase in special events, facility and garden rentals, family programming, and the addition of bicycles to the Arboretum. For those of you who haven't been here that long, bicycles are a fairly new addition to the Arboretum grounds. We also looked at a staff increase during that time frame. And at the time we did this plan in 2010, the leadership team gave us this guidance for looking for the next 5 years. We wanted to grow the attendance by maybe 20 or 30,000 per year, which we've kind of outdone that goal. We needed to increase revenue through rentals, so we needed to look at other rental opportunities. We needed to expand the central area parking and monitor overflow parking. We liked the idea of adding some sort of a new multi-purpose building and or garden space, and we agreed that we wanted to increase sustainable practices in all areas of the Arboretum. So that developed this 2010 master site plan. We ended up with 8 different projects that we were going to help try and promote moving forward. One was a tree exploration station over on the west side. Looking at doing a new Thornhill master plan. We wanted to expand the permanent parking, and we were looking at the most logical place for that was over at P33. And number 4, we wanted to look at a new collections and facilities complex, so a new maintenance complex for the Arboretum. Number 5, we wanted to look at a special events pavilion. At that point in time, we were thinking about somewhere on the concert lawn. 6, we wanted to expand the visitor center. Even in 2010, we realized that we were a little bit bursting at the seams in the visitor center. Number 7 was creating entrance enhancements, so creating a new atmosphere for people as soon as they come through the gates at our front entrance. And then number 8 was the geographic exploration station, which was one of the visitor stations that had been promoted. And then we were looking at the little yellow hexagons that are on the plan as education stations. So changing the name visitor station to more of an education station. So this shows changing just the name of the Prairie Visitor Station to an education station, and then Big Rock. And I believe we've kind of created an education station with the at P8 with the geographic visitor station, or not the geographic, with the Gateway to Tree Science. So here we hired an outside consultant team to help us come up with design schemes for these major projects so that we would know kind of in general what they would cost as we're moving forward with our second capital campaign. So starting with the top left, this was the tree adventure area. So it was a canopy walk that went from approximately, this is Thornhill and Thornhill parking lot up here. So enhancing the first parking lot you come to as you're going on the west side and creating an elevated walkway through the grounds here. The second project is looking at a permeable parking lot where P33 is over on the west side. This one on the upper right was the first rendition of how we envisioned a new South Farm complex. The building is oriented a different way, and the vehicle storage building is not quite as large. Then down to the lower left, when we talked about doing an events pavilion on the concert lawn, that got changed as we went through our planning process, and it became an events pavilion or conference center over on the west side near Thornhill, so that we could create an area for education and for events over on the west side of the grounds. We looked at 4 areas to improve in the children's garden, from Wonder Pond to the staff building, to the picnic shelter, to the entryway, to the backyard discovery garden. And then we looked at the development of a geographic visitor station over in the Asian collection. So of course, our design ideas were way larger than our budget, so we had to narrow down the projects that could move forward with our Growing Brilliantly campaign. So we ended up with the South Farm Maintenance Complex in the upper left, and added into that an update to the plant production area over on the west side. We looked at the children's garden improvements, so not only improving the building, but also looking at the walkway around Wonder Pond and a new picnic pavilion roof. And then the other projects that made it into this capital campaign were the Center for Tree Science, the Tree Conservation Program, and the new plant development projects, and the Center for Tree Science included the Gateway to Tree Science. In the meantime, we were also looking at the buildings outliving their usefulness over up in the Thornhill campus. So we were looking at the outpost and the annex and not being able to continue using those buildings. And you can see this is from the 1999 plan. Here's where the outpost was in the annex. This was the master site plan from 1999. We decided before we replaced those buildings and put a new building, the education support building in, we needed to really take a look at the Thornhill campus a little bit more closely. So we went through a planning exercise to determine how we could create a new campus on the Thornhill end of our grounds. We looked at taking the vehicular traffic out of the main walking system so that we could create an educational zone, a conference zone, and a school bus zone so that we could separate all of these things as we moved forward. But what we most wanted to find out is that we wanted to make sure where we were planning the education support building that we weren't going to be interrupting any future plans. So you can see this is in detail looking at how we could expand this education area. We're looking at a larger open air pavilion since we have a large tent area next to our open air pavilion, since it doesn't begin to house all the students and people that we have there for all the events and for summer camps. We're looking at a new staff building and then possibly dreaming big for a new education building too. So we moved down in this planning in the last 10 years. We also looked at a program and space needs assessment. So we worked, this is more recently, with the knowledge management team, the visitor services and facility rental teams, administration, science and conservation. So we were looking at trying to measure what our current space use is and what our needs were for the near future. So we were looking at staff projections, current space issues, prioritizing of current and future needs, and changes to the existing programs and services. So as a result of all of the interviews and forms that people filled out and discussions with the different departments, we worked with an outside architect and he came up with these plans, and this is just representative of one floor of one building, looking at what our current space utilization is. So you can see, as you would expect, red means we're over capacity. So this is the admin research building. So to orient you, this would be coming down the main walkway into the reception area of the admin building, and this is the Cudahy Auditorium here. So this is going into the development offices that are just slightly overcrowded, and then looking at our information resource team and their lack of personal space, and looking at human resources and our volunteer office, looking back at the marketing office. Then you can see yellow is at capacity, so it's comfortable but well utilized, and then green are the areas that were found to be below capacity or not necessarily underused or not used at all, but just below capacity per square foot. So that was looking at the old botany lab, which is now our lunchroom. It looked at the conference areas, and then the area by the vault and the first floor of the research building. Then as we looked over at the first floor of the visitor center and the West Pavilion, we were looking at areas of overcrowding, which one would be the storeroom for the store, and then the restroom area at the visitor center, and then the offices for Aramark and for the kitchen staff. Also looking at our plant clinic area and just overcapacity for the number of people that come in and out of that space and the square footage that's allotted for it. So we do realize, and we realize some of our areas that are below capacity, which would be the Sycamore room. Also, we have to leave open space for a lot of the different programming uses that we have. So it's kind of looking at where we're pinched for space now and where we have a spot to expand in the future. So some of the results from that project were to talk about moving the mailroom from the second floor of the visitor center to the first floor of the research building. We're looking at converting one of the first floor conference rooms in the research building to a human resources office. Looking at adding a window to the door of the vault room just to make it a more habitable space. And then looking at on the lower level to add a wall to separate the design hub conference room from the open design office in the basement of research so that we would create another conference room that could take the place of the one on the first floor that we were losing. And then looking at just rearranging furniture on the second floor of the development offices to accommodate more staff and create a little bit better flow. So as we reviewed all of this back, then those are just a few of the highlights. As we reviewed this information with our leadership team, we decided that we would really look at not spending additional funds on buildings that are determined to be near the end of their life cycle, which means buildings that have structural problems that are going to cost millions of dollars to repair, but yet still don't have ADA accessibility or the right layout. We have a lot of buildings that were changed halfway through their lifespan to become changed from housing to offices. So it's not the most user-friendly floor plan for the most part. Then just recently we completed an Arboretum access study. With the increase in all the visitors here at the Arboretum, we've really looked at how it's impacting access to the Arboretum and what we could do to help with those issues. So this is a wonderful piece of information from our visitor operations team. But this, as you go across the top, this gives you the days of the week from Sunday through Saturday. And then this is the months of the year from January through December. And the darker red or more orange the day means the larger number of crowds that we have there, the number of times that we're backed up getting into the Arboretum. So as you can see, it happens mainly on weekends. And then Wednesdays, which is our discount day. And you can tell it starts around Arbor Day weekend and goes through fall color is our busiest time of the year. And as you say, they say that the perfect storm was a warm, sunny day with a lot of public and private events going on. So this traffic study did look at the number of festival days we have, the number of special events we have, the number of rentals that we have, and looking at timing and the throughput at the front entrance. So we ended up from this study with 4 recommendations for 4 different areas of concern with our access. The first was to address additional parking for vehicles on the grounds without having to use grass parking or overflow parking. So after we looked at several different areas on the grounds, it was determined that the grass parking by parking lot 4 up at the top of Frost Hill would be the best and most logical spot to add a new permeable parking lot. It's close to, so that's down here. It's close to the highway, so it is a fairly noisy site. It's got easy access back to the main campus, to the visitor center. So, and it's a little bit tucked out of the way. So as you're coming up Frost Hill and heading towards the crabapple collection, the parking lot's not in your main view shed. As you're looking that way, you can be looking towards Crabapple Lake as you're coming down the road, and then you have to take a right turn, and the parking is kind of tucked back in behind the road. We're also talked about a multimodal entrance, which means how do we handle all those people that are either coming in on foot, on bicycle, on mass transit, if we had such a thing coming to the Arboretum, and bicycles. So we're looking at separating that traffic out of the traffic that comes in our main gate would help relax the number of people going through the main gate. Oh, and ride share too, I don't believe I said that. So this would be looking at changing out the Arbordale entrance into a multimodal entrance, just mainly for a bus drop-off or a trolley drop-off from the train station. Here, looking at rideshare, spots for people to park to drop off or to park and wait and pick someone up. Looking at bicycle access and pedestrian access. Lyle has a plan in place, or a future plan in place, to add a bicycle lane along Route 53 on the west side, so that would provide entrance for bicycle riders safely to get into our grounds. And then this area would be fenced off, and there would be a kiosk and an entry for pedestrian access onto the grounds. We also looked at the using the night exit, or the Park Boulevard exit or entrance, for special use entrance. So this is Park Boulevard here. And this would bring people in and provide a gatehouse on the west side, mainly for people that are coming for specific education programs or special events up at Thornhill. So people that were doing that would be given instructions on how to access the Arboretum and would be entering there. We also did think ahead, though, to provide a turnaround for those that do come in this entrance and were not coming to the right place, because we also agreed that it wasn't a good general entrance, because people would be very disoriented as to where they're coming out of the grounds unless they were going to a specific event up Thornhill. And then last but not least, we looked at being able to provide an additional gatehouse at the entranceway. So right now, those of you may know that our entryway, or the area around our entryway, is in the floodplain of the DuPage River, which, after last night may be slightly underwater. So we're not looking at increasing the pavement in that area. And this graphic shows that here's the existing width of the pavement for our 3 gatehouses, and it's 64 feet. BB means to the back of the curb. And we can, by just narrowing those lanes and making the gatehouses slightly smaller, we could add a 4th lane in there without adding any additional pavement. We'd still, it would provide us a little bit more stacking space and a little bit more use of the entryway to get people through, but it would still be a fairly costly improvement to that area. And then last but not least, we had the strategic plan that has just been completed. So it's looking at our strategic pursuits and laying all of those pursuits, as well as our employee core values, over our future planning here at the Arboretum as to how we want to move forward with our next 10 years. As always, we look at our mission and our vision that should be guiding any of the new planning that we do here at the Arboretum. So that has not changed. So that we also, besides our strategic pursuits, we also have to be thinking about our mission and vision as we do our future planning here at the Arboretum. So this section of the talk will talk about changes since 2010 here at the Arboretum. So we've had increase in display horticulture and an increase in interpretation of our collections and improvements to our natural areas. We're looking at a lot of additional events here at the Arboretum. These are just a few from the Art and Wine Walk. The Husky Heroes have been around for quite some time. Our Wednesday Woods and Wine has evolved into our Arbor Evenings. So we've moved from Arbor Court out to the event lawn just south of the hedge garden, because we have so many people that are coming. That event lawn space is also used for a lot of beer and wine festivals. And we've added our little four-legged friends with our dog days, which have been extremely popular. You could also tell those days on our biggest backups of traffic coming into the Arboretum. And we also have our festivals, from the Fall Festival and our glass pumpkins to our Asian Festival and our European Festival, and looking at our Pumpkin Palooza and our Arbor Day festivals, just things that really bring a lot of extra value to our members and bring new visitors in to help them understand what it is we do. And we certainly aren't suggesting that we do away with any of those things. We're just looking at how do we accommodate those, and how do we evaluate our grounds to see where we could either do more or move them around. So this is a good time to kind of pause and see where we are in our planning for all of these things. Our exhibitions have done a lot to bring additional visitors here to the Arboretum. These are just a few over the last few years, as well as the crowds that are attracted by illumination. So that's something that's new in just the last 7 years. So 10 years ago, when we did our master plan update, we weren't thinking of doing a light show at night for a month and a half. So it's something to now be thinking ahead in our next years of planning. What's the next out there idea that we're going to want to incorporate into our grounds? We've done a lot with increasing the collections interpretation and getting more people out into our collections, but that also has a side effect of impacting the grounds a little bit more, making a lot more trail use and a lot more parking out on our grounds. So is that the best way to get people to the different interpretation areas? But it's also a good way to get people to understand the Arboretum a little bit more. And we're looking at research on our grounds. It's something that has been around since the beginning of the Arboretum, but it's been fairly invisible. We do, for those of you who don't know where Weirfield is, if you're up at Thornhill and you take a left and go past the overflow parking and really out to the west side is where a lot of the Weirfield research plots are. We also have the nursery, the research and tree breeding nursery on the east side, down near parking lot 7 and parking lot 8. We also have the UIC property that's on the far, far east side. But other things to think about are looking at visiting scholar housing. How can we keep attracting people that want to come and work with us here? We also have a request for dirty lab space, means not dirty meaning muddy, soil, a lot of soil, a lot of things that you don't want to bring into a clean building for lab space. And then looking at climate controlled storage. Storage is something I don't think we can ever have quite enough of, but we thought with our last plans, we planned ahead for a lot of storage at South Farm and the new curatorial and operations building, but it's amazing how quickly storage gets filled up. So we need to plan ahead for that too. So this gives you just a little bit of perspective on the timeline here at the Arboretum as to when different buildings did arrive or on our grounds. So the admin building that some of you are still working out of was built back in 1935. The Thornhill Education Center was 1942, all the way up to our first visitor center was really not until 1973, which is kind of amazing to me. The library was dedicated back in 1963. So in the first 50 or so years, we have almost as many buildings built as we have built or renovated in just the last 15 years. So the first capital campaign showed the biggest surge in new building here on the grounds with the Children's Garden, the new visitor center, and then on to the Arbordale Head House with our last capital campaign, the vehicle storage building, the Cudahy renovation, the curatorial and operations building, and the education support building. So this is a view that you don't get to see every day of the South Farm complex. It really gives you a view of how we connected up with the research building here, with the curatorial and operations center, the new permeable parking lot, and the vehicle storage building. And over in Arbordale with plant production with 2 new greenhouses, moving the 9 hoop houses over that were on the east side over to the west side, and building a new work building. So an office space and a workspace for the plant production crew, as well as, you can see, just a small soil storage building on that campus also. The children's garden saw the improvements of the new walkway around the backside of Wonder Pond. We found the new picnic pavilion, shelter roof, and the addition of additional space on the interior of the children's garden support building. And then the new education support building over on the west side near Thornhill, in almost the exact same footprint of where the old outpost building was. And then the Cudahy room renovation, that was something that came about as part of the South Farm project, because we needed to, as we were tearing down buildings at South Farm, we needed to provide a lunchroom and a break room for the collections and facilities staff. So we ended up taking over the botany lab on the first floor of the research building. So we looked at really a desperate need for another larger gathering space and a more useful multi-purpose room than we had from the old Cudahy Auditorium, which is, I think Chris Bachtel's giving a lecture in there. But it was the old 50s look with the wooden classroom seats that were permanent, so you couldn't really change the room. The floor sloped, it had a stage, it was very a dark cave. So it was a matter of taking that under renovation and creating a nice multi-purpose room that could be used for a lot of different events and education programs. So, and really ended up being a much bigger and more useful room, especially in prime real estate in the admin building, than the botany lab was. We also snuck in the research third floor renovation. So the herbarium and the lab space, and the gateway to tree science. So looking at how we could really finally have a way to showcase all the research going on here at the Arboretum to the average visitor. And looking at the gateway to tree science entry pavilion. So that brings us back to, why is Susan telling us all of this? And what does this have to do with anything? But it's really a matter of giving you a basis to help us determine what is coming in the future here at the Arboretum. Oops, I'll go back one again. If we were here doing this in person on the grounds in a large room, I would have you divide up into groups now and put your favorite ideas on Post-it notes, and then we would go through the process of putting all those Post-it notes up on a board in categories, and we'd see kind of what rises to the top, what most people are in agreement about, and what are the really crazy ideas that we really need to not throw out, but keep off in another spot to determine, you know, what new ideas we really want to embrace. Also looking at how the social distancing and pandemic and this whole new vocabulary we've all gotten in the last couple months is going to affect how we're moving forward with our planning here at the Arboretum. So those factors that we are considering as we move forward into the questions that are going to be asked of all of you, that now that you are fully versed in the history of the Arboretum and how we do our planning here, is looking at land use. So moving forward, where do we need to expand collections? Where do we need to put new research facilities? How should our natural areas continue here on the grounds? And what other amenities are really needed for both for staff and for our visitors? Looking at circulation, you know, do we need to address accessibility a little bit more than we already are? Do we need to maybe get rid of all parking and make everybody park off site? Or do we need more parking? Do we need to look at saying that, okay, we can only have electric vehicles come here to the grounds? And just looking at all those things and what you think the future is going to hold for us. Looking at building capacity. Are we saying, okay, we want to get all buildings off of any grounds that can be used for research or for collections, and we need to put all the buildings off on the edge and out of sight so none of our visitors ever see those? I mean, just looking at that. Or do we need a second visitor center because our visitor center is so overcrowded and, you know, we don't have enough room for anything? Also looking at our maintenance, our utilities, our infrastructure. what's doing well, what really is being taxed. Do we need to have Wi-Fi throughout the entire East Woods? I mean, just thinking about those things as we move forward. And then view sheds. Okay, what do we really need to preserve? What is historic about this site that nobody should mess with ever? So what do we need to really protect visual view sheds? What do we need to screen? Have we done a good enough job screening the highway? Do we really need to do more? Do we need to look at our hydrology? I know Kurt has done a lot of work with our drain tiles and mapping those and seeing where our wet areas are and where our dry areas are. Should we just start to embrace the existing hydrology, or do we need to look at really improving it in certain areas? And then we look at those with the lens of our strategic pursuits on our grounds. I mean, we're all about trees. We're about climate change and how we can affect that. We're looking at sustainability and how do we become a more sustainable arboretum, and then inclusion. How do we make sure everyone feels included as they come here to our grounds? And we need to encourage all groups to be here on our grounds. So that's just a little bit to think about as we're moving forward in our next 10 years of planning. So all of you will be getting a form emailed to you after this presentation, and you're going to be asked these 4 questions. So it's always good or easier to start with complaining about something. So everybody usually has a complaint. But so what's not working here? What's your biggest pet peeve about what's not working on our ground? Is it there's too much parking and that's the thing I hate the most? Or there are too many people in Arbor Court, that's what I think is not working? Or is it, sky's the limit as to what you think is not working? Is our interpretation on the grounds you can't find your way anyplace? Any of those things. And then looking at what are our best features here on the grounds, which should be fairly easy. I mean, it could be, okay, our best feature is our collections. You should look at that top right. Okay, the crab apples in bloom, that's our best feature. Or is it fall colors our best feature? Or is it the way we place our exhibits is our best feature? And then thinking a little bit outside the box, what have you, if a lot of you do travel to other gardens or other parks or other vacation spots, and then you see things, other places, and what have you seen? Other places that you think we should try here? And then the final question is, really the testing our skills and our abilities, saying, okay, if money were no object, what would you like to see here on the grounds? Maybe brings me to the end. So I will stop here and check in with Carissa to see if we have any questions or if anybody wants to give us ask any questions in the chat room now.
We've not had, okay, well, we did one question just come in, and of course we can unmute ourselves and ask out loud. Brooke asked, which buildings are considered to be near the end of their life cycle?
Okay, that would be the oldest buildings. Mainly it would be probably the admin wing of the building that was built back, when did I say in the, I'm terrible at dates, but that's one of our oldest buildings. So the admin building and down to the library wing, they were built of limestone that's very porous. So we have a lot of water that's leaking through. We got estimates a couple years ago, it was going to cost almost $2 million to reskin the building. So we were looking at, okay, are we throwing good money after bad on buildings that are at the end of their life cycle? Because when you go to the interior of the building, okay, we don't have accessible restrooms. We don't have, an elevator to the second floor. They're looking at buildings that have a lot of issues and really evaluating how successful we can be with renovating them versus building a new building, or looking at, okay, is that even the best place for that building? So right. Hopefully that answers the question.
And there's a couple more. So what is the overall timeline of the process? So this is the beginning of the conversation. What does the rest of this look like?
Okay, what we the process last time was about 9 months, and this we're kind of at the beginning of this process. It's a little different since we're doing it online, but it'll probably be 9 months. So we're hoping by the end of 2020, we will have recommendations to move forward. We'll have a new document that says, okay, here's where we are at this point in time, and here's what we think we should focus our energy on the grounds moving forward for the next 10 years. And that will possibly feed into the next capital campaign and the next development process for the Arboretum. Because the one in 2010 really fed into the last capital campaign for Growing Brilliantly. And the first capital campaign in the first master plan in 1997 led into the first capital campaign that we did, the branching out, not Growing Brilliantly, but branching out.
And we have a follow-up question on the kind of building life cycle question, which is about Thornhill and kind of where Thornhill in that building fits into the life cycle of renovation and improvements.
Thornhill, I think, hasn't been evaluated as much. I think it'll be a matter of looking at the building systems, so the heating and cooling system, looking at the functionality of the building, looking at the size of the spaces, but it hasn't risen to the top of the list as something that needed to be replaced, though it is something that we realize we've adapted uses, and I think there's been a lot of desire to have more classrooms that are above ground. I mean, one thing when we did our building and space analysis is, the basement's not the best place for, people. So it's maybe a better space for storage or for small short-term conference rooms or things like that. But it's a matter of evaluating all of those factors.
Okay, and then we have a question from Jim about a planned upper limit for visitation. So thinking about capacity, I think is what we're going for there. Is there an upper limit? Is the sky the limit? And does that impact how the planning process moves forward?
I would think this planning process is going to have to address that somehow and make recommendations. I mean, this is just a document that will help guide us in the future. It's still a leadership team decision on whether they ever wanted to cap attendance, or looking at maybe it becomes a health issue as looking at timed ticketing for every time that people are at the Arboretum, which we're going to start out with coming back on June 1st, but there are other large gardens. I believe Longwood Gardens does time ticketed year round for their visitors, just to keep it from becoming too crowded at any one time. So it's something that certainly could be discussed.
There's a question, and might have been answered, around the canopy walkway and where that was proposed on the grounds originally back when that was being discussed.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite unrealized projects, but it was over just on the west side across the road from where Daffodil Glade is, but starting there and leading, there's a ravine between the road and Weirfield, the research plots, that really cuts through there. So it was easy to make an ADA accessible ramp up into the canopy. And you got, I believe, almost a 70-foot vertical difference from the bottom of the ravine up to the top of the walkway, and having it go through. And it had 3 different challenge levels, and it had probably a lot of other construction issues, but it was a very fun project, but just didn't rise to the top with our last capital campaign.
And then there's another question about encouraging carpooling and, considering the idea of members only or a carpool lane. I think that's a good suggestion, maybe to go in the survey. Susan, I don't know if you want to talk about that more. Or...
Those are the ideas that we're looking for as we get feedback from all of you. I mean, put down anything that you think of. I mean, I think we're asking for 3 or 4 ideas in the different categories, but if you have more, feel free to share a few more if you have them. And it'll be a matter of synthesizing through that information, gathering information from maybe our volunteer group and from our board members and from visitor survey, and then analyzing all of that information to help move it forward. And we have another master site plan team that evaluates all the information, and then will help make the recommendations as we move forward.
And there's another similar type of question asking about additional space in the admin building. You know, I think that's still part of the discussion. Is that correct, Susan?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And it's a matter of, okay, if the admin's that overcrowded, you know, or the visitor center's that overcrowded, it's like, what can move somewhere else to allow something else to expand? It's just a matter of, it's amazing once we move the collections and facilities people out of the first floor of the research building, how quickly it got filled in. And it doesn't feel like we left any empty space there at all. So it is a little crazy how quickly we fill any empty space here at the Arboretum. And then determining if we want more building space or we want more ground space. I mean, a lot of the original design ideas were based on getting people outside.
And then there's another question, a good question that I think we'll have to consider, and it was mentioned briefly, but about working from home and whether, you know, what's been happening for the last several weeks might impact the way we think about space planning moving forward.
Yes, I have a feeling it's going to have a really big impact on how we look at staff spacing and who really does actually have to be on the grounds and who can work remotely or share office space and come and go. And I love seeing the people that are outside during this. And it's like, oh yeah, an office in the woods sounds great. I think that's Brenda with the lovely background.
And then another, again, along the same lines, Sharon asking about, you know, balancing the need or want to bring in large crowds with some of the social distancing that we're anticipating and might have to live with for a little while. And how do we balance those two things?
Exactly. And if you have any ideas, put those down on your list, because it's going to take some creative thinking as to how we use open space, how we space tables, how, you know, benches are spaced fairly well on the grounds, but it's a matter of, okay, what other intuitive things can we do in our space planning that allows for large number of people to be on our grounds and still be separate, and just without making it seem too forced or too military. So does everybody realize that you're going to be getting an email with a questionnaire on it if Chris and I figure out how to do this?
Oh, that part's easy, Susan.
Okay.
I also, while we were talking, there's a page on trees that I linked to on the chat that right now just kind of has information that you've all probably already seen from Susan's email, links to some documents, links to the registering for these events. Eventually, the video recording of this session will be up there if you haven't seen it, or if you know staff or, you know, colleagues that aren't able to participate, to send that to them. We'll probably add some more documents there, maybe a link to the survey itself, Susan, as well, so that we have all that stuff in one place, so that if you scroll back up on this chat, it's one of the first items you'll see there, and that page will grow and change over time as the project evolves.
Oh, perfect.
So you can use that as a place to check for more information.
Very good. And we're right on time. Excellent. So any last questions from anyone? Seeing none. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to send me an email if you have any questions.